It was one of those quiet afternoons that seemed to stretch endlessly, where the world outside felt distant and muffled. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open, my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the house. The familiar scent of lavender, the scent I always left behind when I rushed out, filled the air as I entered. There was something about this place, the walls, the furniture, even the soft, worn rug beneath my feet, that made it feel like home. But today, there was a subtle unease in the air, a weight I couldn't quite place. The house felt empty, yet not quite empty. My son's laughter, which usually echoed in every corner, was silent. The usual chaos, the scattered toys, the half-finished drawings, the messy shoes, was gone. For a moment, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. Was everything okay? I stepped into the living room, my eyes scanning the space. There, across the room, sat Uncle Logan, resting on the couch. He wasn't usually here when I wasn't home. It was strange, almost unsettling. His dark hair was ruffled, his eyes half closed, as though he'd been waiting or watching for something. It struck me that something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. "Mom!" came a small voice from behind me, breaking my reverie. My son appeared, his little face curious, his innocent eyes wide as he took in the sight of Logan still lounging in the room. That's when it happened. "Why is Uncle Logan sleeping in your room when you're not home?" he asked, his voice sweet and unsuspecting, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. My heart skipped a beat. The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. I blinked, my breath catching my throat, and turned slowly to face my son. His small face, framed by a mess of wild curls, was the very picture of innocence. But that question, it pierced to the quiet of the room with an unsettling clarity, and for a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes flickered back to Logan, who was now sitting up on the couch, looking a little too alert, as if the weight of the situation had suddenly dawned on him. His lips parted, as though he might offer some explanation, but then he hesitated. I saw the unease in his eyes, an unease that mirrored my own. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. Why had he asked that? Of all the questions, why this one? It was an innocent enough inquiry, something any child might ask. But in that moment, it felt loaded. My mind raced, desperately searching for the right words, something that would smooth over the tension, something that would make everything feel normal again. I glanced back at my son. His wide, curious eyes searched mine for an answer, unblinking, unafraid. He had no idea, I thought, how much weight that question carried. To him, it was just a simple observation. But to me, it was like a spotlight shining on the parts of my life that I'd kept hidden, tucked away behind the walls of our home. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My mind went blank, as though my voice had deserted me. What could I say? Uncle Logan, the man who had once been my closest confidant, the one who had always been there during the hard times, was now here in my room when I wasn't around. And yet, what did it mean? To my son, to me, to Logan? "Mom," my son asked again, more insistent this time. His little hand reached out, tugging at my sleeve, a sign that he wanted an answer. His trust in me, so absolute, made my heart ache. I took a deep breath and forced a smile, even though it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. Well, I began trying to steady my shaking voice. Sometimes grown-ups need space to talk or to rest. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they didn't feel right. They didn't sound right. And I could see that Logan was watching me, his gaze unreadable, as though waiting for me to say more. But what more could I say? How could I explain the unspoken bond we shared without it sounding complicated? My heart raced in my chest as I forced myself to look at my son, his innocent gaze fixed on me, waiting for an answer. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, pressing on me with an intensity that I couldn't escape. His question had been simple, yet it had unraveled something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face. I had been avoiding it, hadn't I? Avoiding Logan's presence, the feelings that lingered between us. But now, with my son's question hanging in the air like a heavy cloud, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I'd tried to push it all down, Tell myself that things had changed, that Logan was just a friend, a part of my past. But now those old feelings were bubbling up, threatening to resurface. I could feel Logan's eyes on me, his presence so close yet distant. He didn't speak, but his silence was almost louder than words. What did he expect from me? Did he want me to explain? To confess? I wasn't sure I even knew what to say. What did I owe him? What did I owe myself? And most importantly, what did I owe my son? The truth was, I had been struggling with this for longer than I cared to admit. The relationship between Logan and me had always been complicated, wrapped in layers of unspoken history. Some beautiful, some painful. We had once shared everything, dreams, fears, laughter, and even tears. But somewhere along the way, things had shifted. The easy camaraderie had given way to something more intense, something neither of us had fully understood, and I had backed away. I had to. After all, I had my son to think about. But now, with my son asking such a simple question, the cracks in the walls I had built around myself began to show. The emotional distance I had created between Logan and me felt suddenly fragile, like it could crumble with just a few words. Could I really explain everything to my son? Could I even explain it to myself? I glanced back at Logan, his face unreadable, but his eyes seemed to betray a hint of regret. Was he feeling the same weight of this moment? I wondered. Had he noticed the shift between us two? All this time, there was a tenderness in his gaze, but it was mixed with a sadness that made my stomach churn. What I hoped for? That we could go back to the way things were before? That I could keep Logan as just a part of my past and nothing more? That my son would never have to know how complicated things really were between us? I blinked back the tears that threatened to rise, not wanting my son to see my inner turmoil. How could I explain all of this to him? How could I make sense of my own emotions, let alone make him understand? He was so young, so innocent, so trusting. I couldn't let him see how much I had changed, how much had happened, how much I had buried beneath the surface. My chest tightened as the weight of my thoughts pressed down on me. I wanted to do what was best for my son, but the truth was, I had no idea what that even looked like anymore. All I knew was that I was torn between the person I had been, the mother I was now, and the woman I had yet to become. And in that silence, the conflict within me grew louder. It echoed in every corner of the room, swirling around me, making it harder to breathe, to think, to speak. The room felt smaller now. It wasn't just a physical space, but the weight of everything unspoken, everything I had been avoiding. I took a steadying breath, but it barely helped to calm the nervous flutter in my chest. My son, still looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes, seemed to sense the tension. He was waiting for me to respond, as though the answer was simple, as though it could be explained away in a few words. But I knew better. Nothing about this situation was simple. "Mom," my son repeated, his voice soft but insistent, a hint of concern creasing his brow. I looked at him, then at Logan. He was still sitting on the couch, his posture now a little more upright, as if he was waiting for me to say something. The way his eyes lingered on me made my stomach churn. Logan had always been a silent presence in my life. But tonight, that silence felt heavy, charged, like it was carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I cleared my throat, trying to find the words that wouldn't betray everything I had worked so hard to keep hidden. Well, I began slowly. Sometimes grown-ups need space to talk or to rest. Uncle Logan is a very close friend of mine, and sometimes friends just need to be around each other. It was a weak explanation. I could feel the cracks in it, the lies I had built around the truth. But I had to say something. Anything to make this moment pass. But my son, ever perceptive, wasn't satisfied with such a simple answer. His brow furrowed, and I could tell he wasn't buying it. He looked at Logan, and then back at me, his young mind clearly trying to piece things together. He was so young, yet he was seeing something, feeling something that I wasn't ready to confront. "Mom," he said, his voice more thoughtful this time. "Why does Uncle Logan sleep in your room when you're not home? Is he staying here?" I froze. The question hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Logan sleeping in my room. It was about the deeper question, the one my son had unknowingly stumbled upon. What was my relationship with Logan, really? I turned away, feeling the sting of guilt. I had never been fully honest with myself about Logan. What had started as a deep friendship had once crossed into something more, something unspoken, something complicated. After everything had happened, after I had made choices that led me down a different path, I had distanced myself from those feelings, buried them in the dark corners of my mind. But now, with my son's question hanging in the air, I could no longer ignore it. I began, but the words got caught in my throat. I glanced at Logan again, who was now standing, walking slowly toward me. His presence was calm, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He wanted me to explain, to say something that would make everything clear, but I wasn't sure if I could. Logan spoke up before I could find the words. "Maybe it's time to tell him the truth," he said quietly, his voice gentle but firm. He was trying to help, I knew, but his words only added to the growing weight inside me. The truth? What truth? The truth about what exactly? I turned back to my son, who was still watching me, waiting for me to say something that would make sense of all this. His innocence was almost painful now, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. I had to say something, anything, but what was the right answer? "Sweetheart," I began, but this time my voice faltered. I couldn't hide anymore. The fear, the confusion, the years of unsaid things, everything I had been avoiding for so long, came crashing down all at once. The room was thick with silence, each passing second stretching into infinity. I could feel the weight of my son's gaze on me, the quiet pressure of his expectations. He was so small, so trusting, and yet here I was, standing in front of him, unable to give him the simple, comforting answer he deserved. The truth had always been messy, tangled up in things I had tried to keep hidden. But now, with his innocent question hanging in the air, I realized it was time to face it. I took a deep breath, my chest tight with a mixture of fear and relief. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice unsteady but determined. "Sometimes people need time to think, to work things out. Grown-ups don't always have all the answers, and sometimes we make mistakes." I paused, feeling the weight of those words. The last thing I wanted was to make my son feel like he was responsible for my mistakes. But the truth was, everything was complicated, and I couldn't shield him from that forever. Logan stood quietly off the side, his hands shoved into his pockets, watching me with a kind of resigned patience. He wasn't stepping in, wasn't trying to fill in the gaps. This moment, this conversation, was mine to navigate. I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but there was no turning back now. "Do you remember when I told you that Uncle Logan and I have been friends for a long time?" I continued, trying to keep my tone steady. My son nodded eagerly, his eyes wide, but there was a flicker of something else there, something deeper than simple curiosity. He knew, he had known all along, perhaps in ways I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. "Well, sometimes friends can be more than just friends," I said, the words slipping out in a rush, almost as though I needed to get them out before I lost courage. "Before you were born, Uncle Logan and I, we were very close. We cared for each other in ways that were different than just being friends. But life got in the way, and we both chose different paths. I became a mom, and he became someone who was always there when I needed him." I glanced at Logan. He hadn't moved, but the expression on his face was soft, as though hearing the words from my mouth made something shift between us. Maybe it wasn't just my son who needed to hear the truth. Maybe I needed to hear it too. "Uncle Logan has always been someone I trust," I continued, my voice growing a little steadier. "And sometimes people need to be around those they trust. That's why he's here. It's nothing to be scared of or worried about. But it's also something that's hard to explain, even for me." I knelt down in front of my son, looking him directly in the eyes. "Do you understand what I mean?" I asked gently. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head, his small hands fiddling with the hem of his shirt, as though he was processing what I had said. "I think so," he said finally, his voice quieter now, but without the confusion I had feared. "So, Uncle Logan is like a helper?" he asked, the simplicity of the question making my heart ache. I smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "Yes, sweetheart, he's like a helper. But it was so much more than that. So much more complicated. But for now, that was enough. I hugged him close, feeling the weight of everything lifting just a little. The truth had slipped out between us, simple and raw. And in that moment, I felt a small sense of peace settle over me. We weren't perfect. We weren't free from complications. But we were here, together, and that had to be enough for now. The silence that followed my explanation felt different now, softer, like the air between us had shifted. My son was still in my arms, but the weight of the moment felt lighter, as though the truth, however simple, had carved out a small space for understanding to grow. He pulled back slightly, still holding onto my shoulders, his wide eyes now thoughtful instead of confused. "So, Uncle Logan is here because he's helping you?" he asked again, his voice a little quieter, but there was no fear in it now, only curiosity. I nodded, giving him a reassuring smile, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and pride. "Exactly, sweetheart. He's here to help, and he cares about both of us. That's why he's always around." His gaze drifted over to Logan, who was standing by the window now, quietly observing us. The tension in the room had shifted, and for the first time, I saw my son truly take in Logan's presence, not as an unknown figure in the background, but as someone important in our lives. The innocence of my son's face, the way he accepted the explanation without judgment, made me realize something I had known deep down but hadn't wanted to admit. Children don't need everything to be perfect. They just need honesty, love, and reassurance. "Okay," my son said, his face lighting up as if everything had suddenly clicked into place. "I like Uncle Logan. He's nice." I felt my chest tighten at the simplicity of his words. It was that simple for him. Trust was all that mattered. There were no complications, no hidden emotions, no messy histories. He only knew that Logan was someone who cared, and that was enough for him. In that moment, I realized that my son's love was unconditional. He didn't need to understand everything. He just needed to feel safe and loved. I stood up, taking his hand in mine, as I led him back toward the living room. "Let's go find Uncle Logan," I said gently. "We'll all have some time together, okay?" As we walked toward the living room, my son bounced ahead, excited to see Logan. I glanced back at Logan, catching his eye for a brief moment. There was a quiet understanding between us now, something unspoken, but real. The truth had opened the door, allowing us to move forward, even if we weren't sure exactly what that meant. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a small, tender beginning of something new, something real, and something that might just be okay. Later that evening, after my son had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the quiet of my room. The house was still, but it no longer felt heavy. The tension that had pressed on my chest all afternoon had eased, replaced by a strange, comforting clarity. I traced my fingers along the edge of the table, thinking about everything that had happened. The questions, the fear, the truths I had revealed, and the innocence of my son that had forced me to face them. I realized something profound. Life didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. It didn't have to follow neat, predictable lines. What mattered most was honesty, trust, and the courage to confront the things we had been avoiding. My son didn't need every detail of the complicated history Logan and I shared. He just needed reassurance, love, and the knowledge that the people in his life were there for him. And I had given him that. I glanced toward the living room where Logan had quietly settled after our conversation. There was a subtle understanding in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that some things could remain unspoken yet still be accepted. The past didn't have to define the present, and the present didn't have to be perfect to be enough. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of balance returning. I understood that I could navigate my emotions, my responsibilities, and my relationships without losing myself, or my son, in the process. Life would continue to be messy, unpredictable, and complicated, but I had discovered a small, shining truth. Clarity and honesty, even in part, could create a space where love and understanding could flourish. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I finally exhaled, feeling the weight lift in a fragile yet powerful sense of peace settle over me. The questions had been answered, not perfectly, but enough, and for now, that was enough.